contending this year without Kawhi. So I think he'd be a good fit. But I did read an interesting tweet right before we started that they should go for a Rich Kleiman, Rich Paul type, someone that has direct influence with a lot of the game's best players in today's generation. And I think that would be a bold outside the box move. But knowing the Knicks, they'll probably just sign somebody, hire somebody that no one's ever even heard of, and we'll be right back where we are tonight in 2 years saying, oh, another one disappears, another president of basketball operations gone. And, if you're Scott Perry, you're looking over your shoulder like, man, am I next? If he doesn't pull off some good trades this week or the Knicks, don't end the season on a positive note, I mean, we're going to be looking at some sad times at the Garden, sadder than we're looking at currently. So I think it was a good move, though, just to kind of put a little bow on this because Mills was not getting the job done, and I think that Dolan did it. Again, the timing sucked with the trade deadline so close, but it had to be done, and it couldn't wait till the summer. But again, it's a weird week, and that's just how Dolan gets down, man. I have nothing more to say.
Yeah, are you saying that Steve Perry made himself very vulnerable here, Jason? Sorry, I'm trying to fit in a Tyler Perry reference. I got nothing. I got nothing more on the Knicks, Jason. This is all I've got. I'm trying to throw in Tyler Perry references to get past the Knicks. I apologize to America. That was terrible.
I have no words for you. None. I have no words.
He's not even mad, just disappointed.
The guy comes up with one joke that President Trump helped out with, and he thinks he's the show comedian now. Stick to your X's and O's, pal. Leave the jokes to me.
Well, speaking of things that we're going to have to leave to some other folks, the GMs of the NBA are going to be having some decisions to make, Jason, ahead of Thursday's trade deadline. And there's some kind of rumors going around of who might be going where and which teams might be active. So now that we've moved past bad Tyler Perry puns, Jason, do you have any moves that you think will happen or ones that you want to happen? I mean, what do you make of this trade deadline and where do you think it's going?
I want to preface this discussion by saying that this is probably the least amount of trades in one season that we've seen in recent memory, because you look as far back as 2015, 2016, and each of the seasons that came after that, you've seen close to 20 trades per season, right? Do you know how many there have been since the start of the regular season to the time we're recording this podcast?
How many, Jason?
5. And that includes the Jordan Clarkson Exum swap that happened. I think that was the first one. And I think there were 3 or 4 more that came after that. But honestly, I think we're going to be looking at a pretty quiet trade deadline. Look, the columnists are writing, they're hearing things, they're probably being misled by GMs that are saying, Kyle Kuzma is available in a deal, or that, Andre Iguodala has a certain list. I think it's all hearsay. So I want to focus on 3 potential moves that I think would cause the biggest splash in the NBA. And we have to start with Memphis because this is pure comedy. The Andre Iguodala situation gets traded there in a salary dump after Kevin Durant left Golden State, and they didn't have room for Iggy on the roster because the Warriors are hard capped. So they send him to Memphis. Memphis tells him to stay home. Don't even come to training camp. He sat out this entire year, which I think is good for him considering he's played in the last 5 NBA finals. And he probably needed the rest at his age because he's getting up there. He's on the back 9 of his career. But the Grizzlies aren't terrible. I mean, right now they're the 8th seed in the Western Conference, and they look okay. They have a nice young core with Clark and Morant and Jackson and Jay Crowder, who's out there shoving people and taking threes with his team up 18 and getting called names and things like that. I mean, just think of how Andre Iguodala would fit on this team as a veteran leader and role model for this young core. And, it's come out the guys like Dylan Brooks and John Morant don't even want him there because they're disgusted by the fact that he hasn't been around to even show that he wants to be a part of this team. Did you read the Dylan Brooks quote where he said, I hope we trade him, and then I hope that we play against them so he could see what the Grizzlies are all about? I mean, feisty words coming from a guy who was once a borderline roster player in this league. I mean, this is Andre Iguodala, 3-time NBA champion, former All-Star, do-it-all type player who could still help a contender. And for him to not want to even show up to Memphis just shows that players still do run this league. The question I have for you, Ben, is will he ultimately get moved? He's got a short list, and a lot of those teams on those lists I'm hearing will not bring Memphis back too much compensation.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Memphis, it's just getting to a point where I feel like you're seeing the breaking point because it seems like Brooks and then John Morant was seen on social media with some I think it was some tweets that he was retweeting and liking about, let's say, anti-Iguodala stuff, since this is a family show. But I think it's evident that some of the younger guys are chafing at this. And I mean, I don't know. It makes sense to me, Jason. If you were on a team with a guy who isn't really contributing and is saying, I'm basically not going to play for you guys this year, I would be kind of insulted as well. I mean, this is a team that isn't, at the bottom of the standings. Right now, they're right in the playoff hunt. And nonetheless, it feels like Andre Iguodala is sort of disrespecting his teammates by saying, you guys aren't really good enough for me to come back because I don't see you as a contender. And whether or not that's true, I think that's a tough stance to take on a team. If there were some things going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of, that's one thing. But it seems like it's based on the fact that he only wants to play for a contender. And I have to admit, I don't have a great deal of sympathy for that, given that he's still getting paid a fairly large salary. And frankly, he's not on some terrible team. He's on a good team with good young talent. And it's hard for me to really give him too much sympathy. I have to be honest.
No, I know. I don't give him sympathy either. I mean, he's getting paid $18 million to hang out with his family. I mean, I would love that job. The only thing is, there are so many teams around the league that can use him. I mean, the Lakers come to mind because of the relationships there. I'm sure LeBron would love to have him. He's got a few of his former Warriors teammates there, and Cousins, who's injured, and Quinn Cook. But the Rockets, who are in dire straits and trying to trade Clint Capella because he's the only valuable asset on their roster with a tradable contract. I think he would fill a huge void for them playing on the wing next to Westbrook and Harden. So I think Houston comes to mind. Imagine him in Miami, playing next to Jimmy Butler. I don't think he'll go to the Raptors, but I think a lot of those teams in warm climates, you got Miami, Houston, LA. I don't think he fits on the Clippers the way they're currently constructed, but there are a few teams that could really use Iguodala's help. And I think if there's any dominoes to fall, it would be him because this has been sitting in limbo now since the season started, and everyone's pointing to February. Well, that's when they're going to move him because they don't have a choice. They'll lose him for nothing. Well, the Grizzlies may end up saying, you know what, screw you. You're going to stay out, sit out the season, not get a chance to play in the postseason, lose another year of your career because you didn't want to show up. I mean, that's just the nature of the business, and Iguodala might fall victim to that. But ultimately, I do think he'll end up getting moved because I think the Grizzlies just want to put this behind them once and for all.
Fair enough. So that's number one on your list. What's number two? You mentioned there were three. What's your number two big move here at the trade deadline?
So this one kind of surprised me. I'm going to save the middle one for last. But have you heard that the Atlanta Hawks are actually taking calls on John Collins? We talked in our season preview about, I was wrong on the Hawks. I thought they'd be a playoff contender this season. But, you have that young core of Trae Young, who's been in and out of the lineup with various injuries, Herter, Reddish, Hunter, and Collins, who did have that 25-game PED suspension. But the Hawks surprisingly are taking calls on him. I mean, I don't think he gets moved, Ben, but it's a little scary when you have a second-year player like that who puts up numbers when he's healthy, has so much potential, and you're an organization who's rebuilding and you're getting ready to give up on one of your cornerstones. I mean, what do you make of the situation? Are you buying into any of this?
I think it's very interesting, and it shows just how all over the map the Hawks seem to be because there's rumors of them making a trade for a big man. They showed some interest in Andre Drummond. They made all these trades. They ended up with Trae Young in the Luka Doncic deal. So there's just been so much activity, and it's really hard to see what their vision is. And it's just I find them very hard to read as an NBA team because I'm just not sure really where they're going. I like Herter still. I think Young's a good piece. They obviously need a lot more defense, and maybe this move is. I mean, the only thing I can kind of make of this move is that maybe it's their way of kind of and Travis Schlenk is their GM who came from the Golden State Warriors system. Maybe it's his way of kind of trying to give them a little bit more time to find another piece. And the reason I say this is that John Collins' deal, I believe, is up after next year, and then he will be eligible for a big time extension, and he's going to get paid. I mean, it's just the reality of the situation is that when his contract's over, he's going to get paid big money. So maybe this is the Hawks saying, Trae Young is a bad defensive player. That's just the way that it is. I mean, we put cards on the table. He's not a good defender. He's one of the worst in the league. And they might not see Collins as a guy who projects to be someone who could protect the rim. And if that's the case, maybe they think, Jason, hey, if we can get rid of this guy now for either someone locked in on a deal, we can have flexibility later, or maybe we can trade him, get some assets, and then get someone who we think is a better fit with Trae Young. I mean, do you think that they might just not view him as a long-term piece next to Trae Young?
See, I thought that they would because they're a nice little 1-2 punch, and it would surprise me to see him move. But the one thing that would make me so happy is if whoever acquires Collins, whether it's a playoff team or not, gets Vince Carter attached, because nothing would make me happier than to see Vince go to a contender in his final season and try and win a ring. I know he's not ring chasing, but the Vince Carter fan in me, going back to his days in Toronto early on in his career, I would love to see him play for a contender because he is in the thick of that rotation, man. And I think he'd do wonders for a contending team, at least from a veteran leadership standpoint, playing 10 minutes a night. So if John Collins goes to a contender, maybe get a third team involved, get Vince Carter to Houston, get him to the Lakers, get him to the Bucks, get him somewhere. Reunite him with Brook Lopez. I mean, I don't know. Now my mind's working.
I mean, maybe not the Rockets, Jason, because you saved the best for last, but there could be a deal that might change the Rockets' contention.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack here. There's talks of like a 3 or 4 team trade with the Warriors, the Timberwolves, the Rockets, maybe another 4th team. But the main pieces involved here are D'Angelo Russell, Andrew Wiggins, and Clint Capella. Houston has not been shy about them trying to trade Capella. We mentioned it earlier. He's the most valuable tradable asset on this roster, and they're trying to get better by dealing Capella. Some names out there like Nene, Evan Turner. But what surprises me is what the Warriors might be doing with D'Angelo Russell, because they did that sign and trade with Brooklyn with the intent of keeping Russell there with their stars. But now that it's just Draymond playing right now, and Steph and Clay are out pretty much for the season, I think Steph will be back in about a month. It looks like the hardcap Warriors could look to move Russell elsewhere. And honestly, I don't think a trade of this magnitude will go down. I'll be shocked if it does. But can you imagine Russell in Minnesota with Karl Anthony Towns? I think that would quiet a lot of the get Towns out of Minnesota crowd. Andrew Wiggins would likely go to Golden State and back up, Klay Thompson, or even start with those guys. I think that would be a nice fit when you don't have 2 ball dominant guards with Curry and Russell. So I think it'd be pretty interesting. Have you heard anything about this? Do you see a trade like this potentially going down? And what would you think about it if it does?
Well, the trade that I saw was that Covington would end up in Houston, Capella would go to the Hawks, the Timberwolves would get Russell, and the Warriors would get a slew of draft picks and likely Andrew Wiggins. And that is a fascinating trade on so many levels, because for the Rockets, obviously they get a perimeter defender, and it's pretty interesting because it tells you that the Rockets feel like they can manufacture a big man, basically. That they don't value Capella in that role, because if they're getting a guy like Covington, this isn't a move to get younger or to build for the future. This is a win now move, in which case it tells you sort of what they think about Capella and his value. The most interesting part might be what it means for the Timberwolves. To be honest, I am really sort of I'm just surprised, I guess, in terms of why they're going after a guy who just doesn't seem like he fits next to Towns at all. And they're going to largely mortgage their future to get him, too, because they're going to give up 2 of their best pieces to get him. So it's a very strange trade to me in some ways. I think for the Warriors, it's really interesting because suddenly you might end up with a top 5 pick and then another top 5 or 10 pick from the Timberwolves, And then